detective paid to snoop around?
He's dead, Mr. Angel.
Well, you know what they say about slugs. They always leave slime in their tracks. Are you afraid?
Yeah, I'm afraid.
I'm a murder suspect already in 2 cases.
Did you kill him?
No, but the cops might think I did.
The Prince of Darkness protects the powerful.
The egg is the symbol of the soul. Did you know that?
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me once again in the car on this Thursday early evening here in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So tonight will be the 7th entry in our month-long series, Halloween Horror. And I figure, given that I've discussed a number of the standards, such as The Exorcist, such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Blair Witch Project, the original Candyman, since we've gone into those standards, I feel like talking about my single favorite horror film of all time. My single favorite horror film of all time, the one that I've gone back to repeatedly, and the one that still creeps me out, and even though I've seen it, I couldn't even tell you how many times. The jump scares still make me jump. And the sense of growing paranoia and creeping dread and the real significant supernatural twists of the story, they still hit. And that movie, of course, is Sir Alan Parker's highly influential, as Christopher Nolan has discussed, highly influential adaptation of William Hjortsberg's terrific novel, Falling Angel, 1987's Angel Heart. Now, Angel Heart was a film that had a lot of buzz in advance of its release, to theaters, of course. Now, this is just a historical quirk, but Angel Heart was released to theaters March 6th, 1987. That is the same day that the original Lethal Weapon, Richard Donner's, you could argue, masterpiece, certainly in the conversation for best buddy cop or buddy film period ever made. But Angel Heart had really strong buzz. And this is really neither here nor there, but when I was at New York University Film School, I used to spend a lot of time at the Bobst Library. I mean, obviously the library is still there, and I'm sure the shelves are even dustier than they were, 29, 30 years ago when I was attending classes at Tisch. But they had old issues of Film Comment, that's a magazine that's still going, by the way, and American Film, which I don't believe survived even until the 2000s. I think American Film, I feel like its publication run ended sometime around 1995, 1996. But I was interested in looking at pre-release chatter, and those magazines were different than Entertainment Weekly or Daily Variety or Hollywood Reporter because they went more in depth. The interviews were more serious. They didn't ask questions in the way that one of my professors described it. If you're interviewing Martin Scorsese and you work for Entertainment Weekly, you might ask a question like, just how hot is Michelle Pfeiffer? If you work for American Film in the 90s, if you worked for Film Comment, you are asking Martin Scorsese how he achieved a certain rack focus shot in The Age of Innocence. So these were serious, academically bent movie magazines. And I was curious if there was anything on Angel Heart. Again, this is mid-90s. And I was curious if there was anything on Angel Heart. And there was. And for the months leading up to its March release, there were a number of articles in American Film, and they were all saying the same thing. The buzz is tremendous. This could be an Oscar contender. People who've seen it can't stop talking about it. The fact that the movie more or less bombed at the box office, and it didn't quite hit the critics the way that you would think. And this is another one of those movies, not that it was trashed by critics, but it's way better remembered historically. It was underappreciated in its day. And then there were so many different films and filmmakers that took inspiration and or just outright stole entire plot points, however you want to slice it. But this was a movie that was very influential, and Christopher Nolan, as I mentioned, it's in his short list of favorite horror films, and he's even said some of the concepts of memory and setting a mood and playing with a timeline he did in not Insomnia, Memento. He talked about how Memento was very heavily influenced by what one of his filmmaking heroes, Sir Alan Parker, was able to achieve in Angel Heart. And that's the thing with filmmakers, and we've seen this from Quentin Tarantino. Some of his favorite movies, you'd say, well, that movie got trashed by critics. It doesn't matter. It's how a movie works on you rather than what critic A, critic B. It doesn't matter if it's Siskel and Ebert or Jeffrey Lyons or David Denby or Pauline Kael. It's not about how it hit them. It's about how it hits you. Now, here's a confession. I didn't know anything about Angel Heart when it hit theaters, and I don't really remember it being in theaters. I wasn't up on these things. I was 13 years old. Yeah, I was a movie fan, and maybe occasionally I would read a movie review in Newsday, but it was not the priority that it would later become when I was in film school, not surprisingly, 7, 8, 9 years later. But I read about Angel Heart, and I read about the controversy. And the controversy in this movie doesn't really relate to its kind of greatness as a horror film. But there is a sex scene in this movie that it got slapped with an X rating because it was almost to the level of pornography. And it involves the film star Mickey Rourke and Lisa Bonet, who at the time was a big star on TV thanks to The Cosby Show. And we can make all kinds of jokes about Bill Cosby, who didn't like the idea that his co-star on the show, which was a wholesome show, no joke. The Cosby Show was a very straightforward, wholesome, I mean, it's one of the great sitcoms. We can, again, trash Cosby, but as far as what they were able to do with the show, it's a great show. And Cosby allegedly was unhappy that Lisa Bonet, his, TV daughter, had taken part in this movie that had gotten an X rating, and there was a whole to-do with that. Alan Parker made some cuts, and he got the film down to an R. Although when the movie was released, sorry, I'm always seem to be driving into the sun. When the movie was released on VHS, we're a long time before DVD, obviously, in 87, 88. When the film was released to VHS, and I've never figured out how they were able to do this, but they released the uncut version, the so-called X-rated version. And Angel Heart was one of those movies, and this is another thing, Roger Ebert, who I should point out was a huge fan of this movie, but he talked about the need for a different rating. And even Gene Siskel, who really didn't love Angel Heart, he just thought it was okay. He wasn't as high on it as Roger, who was rapturous in his praise for the film. He loved what Alan Parker, the performances, what they're able to do. He liked De Niro's kind of sly turn as Louis Cypher. But Ebert talked about the need for an A rating, adult. Meaning, you have a movie here that is not pornography. Yes, it's for adults, but this is a serious film, and it should not be classified as if it's a porno, more or less. But the embarrassing thing is, I only rented Angel Heart because I knew that Lisa Bonet was going to be very naked. And I was 13, I had no social life. So here I'm justifying it. I was 13, I had no social life, and I thought she was gorgeous. That's why I rented the movie. I apologize, my younger self, all of that, but that's why I rented the movie. Now, I didn't realize that the nude scenes were going to come, no pun intended, 85 to 90% through the movie. So I rented the movie for the wrong reason. I rented it had nothing to do with, oh, this is supposedly really good, or so-and-so liked it, or so-and-so didn't like it. One of my dad's partners saw it in theaters, and he hated it. He actually walked out of the theater. When I found that out, I was incredulous. But I just watched the movie, and I was riveted. I was hooked. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had never watched a movie like this, and not just because it was dealing with such adult themes and It dealt with memory and murder and potentially somebody being framed for murder. There were so many things going on in this movie. And even as a kid who was just a fan, just a movie fan, I could appreciate the production design was spectacular. The way that they set the time period. And sometimes you just get lucky in the sense that Brooklyn, the area of Brooklyn in which they shot on location, you could go to today, the film, they didn't have to redress a lot of the sets because the buildings could be 1955, could be 1987, it could be 2024. There were certain things where they did have to redress the sets. So some of the scenes in New Orleans, they had to, kind of use the period cars. I'm somebody who always appreciates when they, number one, have the budget, but when you can see that they're really trying to make you forget that you're watching a movie, but that you're actually transported back to Brooklyn 1955. And of course, that was a magical time. Brooklyn 1955, it's when the Dodgers won their only World Series. Now, the movie doesn't specifically reference that, but it says it's 1955, and there is snow on the ground at various points. So I guess it's either supposed to be January or February of 55, or maybe it's December. But we don't actually know, but that's the kind of historical quirk or tidbit that somebody like me really gets a kick out of. But Angel Heart unfolds like a detective story. The first hour, it is a detective story. Mickey Rourke plays a private eye named Harold Angel, hence Angel Heart. But he plays a private eye named Harold Angel who works out of Brooklyn, and he's fairly successful in his way, and he's more clever than he appears to be. He seems like a kind of a slow-witted, almost punchy, maybe he was a boxer, and of course Mickey Rourke in real life was a boxer. But he seems almost slow-witted, but he's not. He's very clever, and it's as if he's using the fact that people think this guy is not really paying attention. He uses it to his advantage. And there's a really wonderful scene, and I've talked about this movie many, many moons ago from the perspective of just how good Mickey Rourke's performance is. But there is a scene where he goes to a long-term care facility as part of the investigation he's doing to try to find a missing lounge singer named Johnny Favorite. He's so good in the scene, but we understand that Harold Angel is not slow. He's not stupid. He's very clever, and he's up on history, and he's up on current events in equal measure, where he instantly calculates that something which was supposedly signed at a certain particular time in history could not have been signed at a certain time in history because, yeah, they didn't exactly have ballpoint 1943. And without saying, this is bullshit, we know that he believes this is bullshit. So the key supporting character in this film is a man with the kind of hilarious name of Louis Cyphre. And Louis Cyphre is played by Bobby D himself, Mr. De Niro, in what I believe is his most slept-on great performance. And De Niro and Mickey Rourke have had a kind of weird they almost were enemies. And it was one way. It was Rourke just felt that De Niro's process was stupid and that he didn't really go out of his way to become his friend. And they had a lot of issues. And then earlier this year, because Mickey Rourke is a real character on social media, he posted something, I don't know what it was, whatever it was, De Niro had done something that Mickey thought was terrific, like real humanitarian stuff. And he went out of his way to say something to the effect of, I had a problem with this guy, but I'm going to tip my cap to him. Way to go, sir. And so I feel like whatever beef they had is over. But again, it was just a one-way beef. And because Mickey Rourke is such a character, you just never know why. But De Niro plays this character of this very well-dressed, we don't really know what he is. It seems that he was some kind of a handler before the war, that maybe he worked with musicians. We don't know. There's a lot of mystery. And the fact that De Niro has a beard and hair, and he's very precisely, beautifully dressed. He looks like Martin Scorsese of that era. You go back to the Martin Scorsese of The Last Temptation of Christ era, the After Hours era, which was a movie that came out, Color of Money. It's not a coincidence that Martin Scorsese that De Niro's mode of dress and his manner, he doesn't speak quickly the way Scorsese does, but he kind of looks like him, as much as two guys who look nothing alike can resemble one another. And I don't think it was an accident. I feel like, especially given what we learn about the character, it's a pretty, as Roger Ebert said, it's a wicked homage to his favorite filmmaker. But he is the one, Louis Cyphre, who gets the ball rolling and the plot, and he hires Harold Angel to find this missing lounge singer called Johnny Favorite. And he seems to imply the guy owes him money, but it doesn't seem like he owes him money. He just owes him some kind of a debt, and we don't know what that debt is. But the first hour of the movie is Harold Angel doing a normal investigation. He meets with a lot of different people, he makes some headway, and people start turning up dead. And this is the kind of investigation and case where, since nobody knows where Johnny Favorite is, since Harold Angel can't find Johnny Favorite, is he missing and can't be found? Is he dead? We don't know. But it's not so much that his investigation hits a brick wall as it appears that Johnny Favorite is bumping off everyone he used to know. And with no Johnny Favorite in sight, it's Harold Angel who's going to be, as he says it, more and more, it's me who's on the line for it. And somewhere around the 1 hour mark, the film is just under 2 hours, including credits, it begins to veer into the supernatural. You start to get the idea that there are greater forces at work here than just a private eye looking for a missing singer. There are a lot of fragments of flashbacks of events that have taken place at least a decade earlier. And we don't know what they all mean. There is a lot of symbolism. There is a lot of notions of hell and heat and characters being very uncomfortable because of how hot it is. I mean, Lawrence Kasdan did that in Body Heat, but Body Heat ain't a horror movie. But there is that idea of it's so freaking hot. You go to New Orleans, it's 98 degrees in the shade, and there is some humor in the first part of the movie, but once the setting shifts from New York to New Orleans, there's nothing funny going on. And Mickey Rourke is a very talented actor, and there were stretches in the 80s where he was headlining films such as this, where there were people who were saying, this could be the new Brando. Now, the phrase new Brando, there were people that believed after Rocky that Sylvester Stallone, with that look, that Stallone had an opportunity. But, Sly really wanted to do different things. He wasn't really that interested in just being an actor. He wanted to be a movie star, and he wanted to, quite frankly, play heroic characters that did heroic things. And if your primary goal is to be a master thespian, you're not going to just keep playing heroes who save the day. And this is where it gets into it, where how certain filmmakers have different obsessions. There are certain actors that are not interested in things that you would expect they would be, and are interested in things you wouldn't necessarily say. But in the case of Mickey Rourke, in films like Body Heat, where he is just phenomenal in that film, with William Hurt, all of his scenes are with William Hurt, the star of the film, and Diner, and Year of the Dragon, where he's playing much older, and Pope of Greenwich Village, and 9.5 Weeks, a somewhat notorious film with Kim Basinger from right around the same time period. But Mickey Rourke was an actor who just had a manner and a line delivery and a way that he could look like somebody who hadn't slept in days and maybe hadn't showered in a week. And it was nothing more than his ability to act with his eyes and his very expressive face. Even as a young man, he had a very expressive face. And in a world of this movie, as things start to go wrong, it's written all over him. And so much of his performance is quiet. It's silent. It's seeing a man whose nerves are screaming for help, trying to cope, trying to figure out what is happening here. None of this can be real. This can't be right. But it's all happening. And the performances by everyone in the cast, from Lisa Bonet, Dan Florek, who plays an attorney, he's a terrific actor. I know he was on Law & Order, but he's one of those people who is very distinctive, and his line readings in this film are just gold, because he has the kind of presentation where it seems as if he's saying more than he's actually saying, and it adds to the mystery of the story where it feels like he's leaving out really important information. And De Niro, as Louis Cyphre, when I first saw the movie, I actually believed that the character of Louis Cyphre was almost a weakness, that he doesn't really get into the movie. But watching the film a second time, a third time, his appearances are perfectly spaced. And when it's all said and done and we realize what exactly has gone on here, it is a mind-blowing twist. And no spoilers, because this is a film I know it's been on Paramount. I think it's on Paramount Plus and Showtime if you get that. It was free on Tubi for a time. It's never been on Netflix to my knowledge. I know that it was also free on Amazon Prime. I'm pretty sure that you can find this streaming free somewhere. Occasionally you'll have a movie uncut that will be just readily available on YouTube. Somebody puts a print up and nobody takes it down for a couple of months. This is not that unusual. But it is a movie, as I like to say, to seek out and treasure. It is a great horror film. It has an enormous rewatchability factor because the first time through there is a lot of narrative information that is critical, that is just going to go right over your head because you're not necessarily going to be focused on certain things. This is a great sleight of hand and misdirection kind of story. As I mentioned last week when I discussed the original The Wicker Man, that is a sleight of hand where you're looking here and you're missing what's happening there. But without spoilers, just to give you an idea of some major, huge movies that took inspiration from Angel Heart. The Nicole Kidman film, The Others. Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island. Hell, even Fight Club takes inspiration from Angel Heart. And I don't know that David Fincher has ever discussed Angel Heart, but I already mentioned how Christopher Nolan ranks it among his 5 favorite horror films, and Sir Alan Parker as one of his, not even close, one of his absolute favorite filmmakers. And he just loved the way that Parker set the stage, set the scenes, and all of that great cinematography in this movie. But it is a film that, because it didn't get the critical reaction that it probably should have, it wasn't nominated for production design, for costume design. It wasn't nominated for cinematography, which is completely insane. The cinematography in this film is incredible. And most of the prints that you'll see out there are really, really pristine, as if the film has been, restored all along, that they never let the original negative degrade. I know that if you're not a huge movie fan like me, that doesn't mean anything, but sometimes you'll see movies from the 80s where the print looks degraded. I have only seen this film where the copy was pristine and the movie just looks gorgeous. So Angel Heart, a great horror film, but also a great a great private eye story, a great detective story, which turns into a horror film. And as one critic, I think it was Bill Harris, who had a TV show he used to host or co-host with Jeffrey Lyons, the Sneak Previews program. That's different from Siskel and Ebert. They were just called Siskel and Ebert. But I believe it was Bill Harris who described Angel Heart as it's Chinatown meets The Exorcist. And when I tell you, that is about as apt a description as anybody could come up with. That's not a spoiler. But it is a private eye story that goes supernatural and is as scary as anything you're going to see. The last 20 minutes of this movie, you will be on the edge of your seat. You have no idea what's going to happen. And you just know that it's scaring you. And you're like this, I can't look. And this is another film where if you go onto YouTube and you check out movie reactors watching it for the first time, you will see people saying, this is incredible. I can't believe I haven't heard of this movie. Hey, they did this in The Sixth Sense. They did this in Shutter Island. They did something similar in Fight Club. They did something similar in Memento. But Angel Heart, the 7th entry in this month-long series of Halloween horror, directed by the late, great Sir Alan Parker and starring Mickey Rourke, Robert De Niro, Charlotte Rampling, Dan Florek, and Lisa Bonet. This has been episode 329 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or the others on which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.